Good morning and welcome to Fresh Waves. I'm your host, Bren Masson. Today we're going to be talking with Lucy Jabrayan, who is the owner of Thrive4life Holistic Pet Food. They're located in Stouffville, and it's a holistically driven pet food store specializing in raw pet food and natural pet health products. Good morning, Lucy, and welcome to Fresh Waves.
Good morning.
This show is basically about helping people to learn things or to think about things that they've never thought of before. And this pet food industry has turned into something that I don't even recognize anymore, with massive box stores that sell everything from clothing for dogs, which has always puzzled me. I mean, I understand a jacket if you have a little dog in the cold, but other than that, I don't understand shoes and boots and Halloween costumes and things like that. It's just not my vibe. I know that out there's a lot of people who it is their vibe, and okay. Dog food. There's so much dog food. Yes. I can't even tell you. It's completely overwhelming to the point where I won't shop for dog food at the big stores anymore. I look for a small, independently run store. I ask lots of questions and I look into things. I have an 18-month-old golden doodle, and I also have a brand new puppy. So this is really pertinent to me right now. I know there's a lot of brand new puppy owners. Since COVID hit, the puppy industry has gone berserk as well. And there are a lot of people who, with all the best intentions, are first-time dog owners. They're exploring the world of how to be good pet owners or guardians, as you would say. But it's so difficult. I find it really overwhelming.
Well, that's because it is overwhelming. There's so much information out there, and it can be quite hectic to navigate. And I think it's important to remember to, what's going to be best for my puppy, and to gauge in all the experts in the field, not just the one, and then making a decision that most importantly resonates with the owners themselves.
Well, that's good advice. I also want to say before we get into things that we're not saying at all in this show that you should not go and see your vet. In fact,
absolutely not.
We have a partnership with our veterinarians. I've walked into my vet's office before. I've owned dogs my entire life. And I've said, look, I've read this about Lyme disease. What do you think? And we have a conversation about it. And from that conversation, we both come up with a plan that best suits my needs and the needs of my dog. And I like that partnership. And I think that's how we should deal with our physicians as human beings as well. So,
me too, yes.
Yeah, this morning we're going to be talking about this. I am not a vet. You are not a vet. And I am by no means qualified to tell people what they should and should not be feeding their animals. So we're going to have a conversation of just what options are out there, what's available to us as pet owners.
Yes, of course. And it is important, as I always say to people, to have a team. And what do I mean by that? On that team, you absolutely need a veterinarian that's going to work with you, not against you, who's going to empower you and not fear-monger you, who's not going to bully you into decisions, but who's going to work with you and, most importantly, put the animal first. And then, as you said, you like to shop at independent pet food places, speaking with a qualified pet nutritionist, and then seeing what's out in the market. I'm also a firm believer in body work, so a good chiropractor or a body worker. So that could also be on your pet's team, as I call it, his or her health team. And all of these prove to be a very essential resource. Now, going back to pet food, if we go into the history of pet food, and this might shock you because it kind of shocked me, you might be thinking that or assume that commercial pet food was made so that a good quality balanced diet option will be there for our pets. And unfortunately, that was not the case. It was just a case to make money. That's it. Let's just scrap something really cheap together and sell it as pet food way, way back in the day. And then that kind of evolved to what we see now with prescription diets. Um, the first pet food that was made wasn't dry, actually. It was a canned product. So it was a canned meat product made out of horse meat. And then when World War II hit, of course, meat was such a scarcity that they decided to go to the dry food option, which is basically all carbohydrates. There's no real meat in it. But that's how the pet food industry really began. So it was never really the intention of putting the dog and cat first, canine and feline health. It was just a ploy to make money as the best way as they could. So that's that. Fast forward to now, you have dry food options, you have raw, you have what I call raw food alternatives. But there are a lot of great options out there that are outside of the vet's office that would be really interesting for people to kind of just look at. And also fresh foods. I personally love to add more fresh whole foods to my pet's diet because that's bioavailable nutrition.
Hmm. Well, I have heard it said that the raw food industry is based on the barf diet. And when I first saw that, I thought, barf? Barf doesn't sound like a positive thing, but it simply means biologically appropriate raw food.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I look at the raw food, I guess the theology where it says, okay, well, dogs are animals who have always eaten raw food in the wild. It's been a long, long time since dogs were actually running around in the wild looking for food.
I'm really glad you brought that up because we say, oh, a long, long time, but 100, 200 years is actually not a long time. It would take a really long time to start altering the genetics and the genomes to really change that. So they are still classified as carnivores, and they still share, 99% genetics with wolves, and their cousins are also the dingoes, the wild dogs. So their insides, their biology hasn't really changed.
So how did you get into this in the first place? I have to ask that before we go any further. Were you just like me? You had a dog and thought, oh, I want to figure out what's the best way to feed my animal.
Yes. So when I had my two pups at the time, they were going through health issues, and up until they were 2, and I was, buying like the really expensive high-end kibble, and they were just going from like bad to worse. And so I did my homework and research on raw and proper supplementation. Well, that's my background, nutraceutical supplementation, herbology. And so with the right food, I watched them heal. One of my dogs, looking back, I could clearly see it was the beginning stages of leaky gut, and she was just really not having a good time. And the thing is that I always tell people our bodies are really simple. It's really not that complicated. And yet, if I took the conventional route to quote unquote fix her, it would have been chemicals upon chemicals upon chemicals, processed diet, when all the body really needed was a break and proper nutrition. That's the first thing the immune system needs, proper nutrition. So when I switched over to raw, and that was also a process, I just kind of watched them heal. I watched them detox, and this took for a few months, and it boggled my mind because I'm like, I'm not feeding the cheap stuff here. I'm paying top dollar for the best kibble out there. And really, it's taking them 3 to 4 months to detox. Like, what the heck? And then, of course, you dig deeper. And when you understand how kibble is made, what kibble is made of, all kibble, I understood that it's really not a species appropriate diet. I can't, like the alfalfa pellets that I feed my rabbit who thrives on it, I can't feed that to my cat. It'll ruin my cat. So, what are they designed to eat? What are they meant to eat? It's actually as simple as that. Same thing with us. The more processed fast food, junk food we eat, you're going to start to see your health slowly declining. It's really the same thing with them. And I also believe it's really important to know how the sausage is made. And that's why I wrote an article on how kibble is made, because I think it's important to understand how it is made. Now, for those that still choose to feed kibble, that's fine. There are ways you can kind of manipulate it, so to speak, to make it just a little bit more gut friendly, just to make it a little bit more species appropriate, if you will. So at the end of the day, you can make anything work, but to really truly watch them thrive, you have to give them what they were meant and designed to eat.
Okay. So how is kibble made? If you looked at it and I haven't, it's an interesting study, I'm sure.
So how all kibble is made, and this is all kibble, from your cheap to very, very, very expensive. Maybe the more expensive has a little bit better ingredients in it, but all kibble is made through the extrusion process. So think high temperature, high pressure, high heat. So if I take a steak and I cook it till it's black, what's left of it? Nothing. Kibble companies know this, so they add a synthetic vitamin mineral pack, most likely from China, because that's the cheapest one you can get. And there you go. You just made AFCO happy. Look, our food is balanced. They're getting all the nutrition they need. And just so you know, when we look at the composition of the food on the bag, like say, oh, okay, good, they're getting like 25% protein. Well, that 25% protein could be coming from corn. That's what's mostly in there. And if you really break it down, and I even give you guys a formula that you can plug in the numbers that the manufacturer gives you on the bag into this formula, it actually calculates for you how much carbohydrate content is in the food, aka sugar. They're not going to put that right on the bag. You know why? Because it's anywhere between 45 to 55% carbs. So let's take a carnivore and feed half of its diet sugar. So that's like, Brenda, you having a donut for breakfast, a donut for lunch, and then having a nice salad for dinner. So another reason why kibble is not appropriate is that, so their bodies are trying to make something out of nothing. But remember how I said when you take a steak and cook it till it's black? Okay, so I was being generous because kibble is not made out of steak. Even the proteins that they start off with is poor quality to begin with. And so another reason why it's not appropriate is because it's about 7% moisture, and they need 70% moisture. And this is where you get chronic dehydration come into play. So when they eat kibble and they're running to the water dish, people think, oh, good, my pet's drinking water. That's actually really not a good sign. Because if you finished a bag of potato chips, you're going to be wanting water. But the more you drink, it feels like you're not really quenching that thirst. Because kibble, when they eat it, actually pulls water from the colon. So it's really hard actually for them to break down. You have to think, in the wild, when they catch a rabbit, a bird, the first thing actually they consume is blood. Blood is very wet and it starts to lubricate the GI system. So it begins the digestion process. Kibble does the opposite of that. It pulls water from the colon. So it actually makes them chronically dehydrated, which is very taxing on all the internal organ systems, the liver, the kidneys, the heart, even their joints take a hit for it. So for those reasons, I personally don't sell any kibble. It's just the composition of the food. So this is why I don't believe that kibble is a species appropriate diet, if you will. They won't really thrive on an extruded product. However, can you make kibble work? Yes, you can make anything work. So first thing is add hydration back in. And you could do that with, simply warm water, or better yet, bone broth, which is also very healing, chock full of minerals, amazing for the gut, amazing for the brain, the joints, coat, or other means necessary. And then add fresh foods, so when you're chopping up your vegetables, maybe the tail ends of the broccoli, steam those up, chop them up, and add it to the food. You're making a world of a difference by adding a little bit of fresh, bioavailable foods back into their diet.
Okay, but if a dog was in the wild, which is what we spoke about earlier, would they really go up to a broccoli plant and eat it?
So,
I'm sorry, I'm just being devil's advocate.
No, absolutely. That's a great question. So when they did a research study and they actually culled wolves in the wild and they opened up their stomach contents, what they found was mostly meat matter, and they found some plant matter as well. And when they take down a prey, the first thing that they're going to consume is their stomach content. And in there, you get the pre-digested vegetables, which is why I always say if you're going to add vegetables to their diet, don't add it raw, cook it and chop it up real well, because we're kind of mimicking what they would eat from the prey stomach. And absolutely, our dogs do eat grass. They know which herbs are good. They know which herbs are poisonous intuitively. I've even seen sometimes my cats occasionally gnaw on a blade of grass. So they do consume some vegetation, but that's about like 5% overall. They would always prefer meat. So when they called these wolves and they saw the contents of their stomach, it was predominantly meat matter and some, about 5% vegetation.
That's fascinating. I mean, I wouldn't, in all my life, I've never heard that. But I guess it makes sense, doesn't it? And most of the animals that a dog would eat in the wild, be it wolf, coyote, or whatever, they are grazing animals because that's how the food chain works. Just like we eat grazing animals, we don't eat predators from the top of the food chain. So it would stand to reason that their gut of a rabbit would be filled with vegetation.
You also brought up a very interesting point when you said grazing. And this is why I also don't believe in the all-you-can-eat buffet, just letting the food sit out there and letting them munch on it here and there. We're actually ruining their metabolism that way. So a herbivore, let's say like a horse or a cow, always needs to keep its stomach moving. And that's why they graze. And that is the way that they were designed. Carnivores, like the coyote, wolves, they hunt, they kill, they eat, they move on.
Yes, and they often go for days without eating. Like they'll go for days with just nibbling on whatever they can find. But the big kill, sit down, have a massive protein fill, happens not every day.
So, Brenda, you're a genius because you brought up another amazing point. And that is, yes, in the wild, they're lucky if they get fed 4 to 5 days a week. Mm-hmm. So another problem I see is not just even with the food content, but how much we feed and overfeed them. Actually, I believe we do overfeed our pets. And that's why for dogs specifically, I'm a firm believer in fasting. Whether that's fasting all day or whether that's just simply fasting one meal of a week, it's so beneficial for them. It's so amazing for their immune system, for their digestion system, everything. Mm-hmm. So another problem I kind of see is that, yes, they are overfed. I think one of the best advice I can give to the listeners is whether you have a dog or whether you have a cat, do some homework, do some research, and learn about the species you have. Because the more we learn about them, and even from an ancestral point of view, like for instance, just by my own research, I learned why sometimes dogs consume poisonous plants. Usually that poisonous plant is tropical. So in their evolution, they were never in contact with tropical plants. So they don't innately know any better because it's so brand new to them. They don't have that instinctual, oh, no, this one we stay away from. So they consume it. Same thing why dogs can lick up antifreeze, because it's a chemical. They don't know it. In their ancestral background, there was no antifreeze. And it smells kind of sweet. So they're like, let me just lap this up. And we know it's extremely toxic to them. So just from doing my own homework and research, I've learned why sometimes they consume poisonous matter.
Mm-hmm.
So
and I don't want to skip that over, because this is the time of year where people are closing their cottages down for the season, and a lot of people use antifreeze in their water systems and in their plumbing so that pipes don't freeze over the winter. Even if you don't have a dog, please don't put your antifreeze in a bucket or a shallow container like a yogurt container or something and leave it on the floor of your garage, because your neighbor may have a dog. And the dogs do love antifreeze. It smells sweet, it tastes sweet, and you will kill the dog. And I'm sure no one out there wants to kill a dog. And if you don't know because you're not familiar with dogs, antifreeze is so poisonous, and it is attractive to them. So always deal with your antifreeze right away. Don't leave it where a dog or your neighbor's or friend's dog could get to it. Put it away. Deal with it as a toxic substance, because that's exactly what it is.
That's right. And thank you for that reminder, Brenda. Very important.
I just know a family who, lived through the puppy stage, terrible twos of dogs, and when their dog was about 3, it got into a neighbor's garage and drank antifreeze and died. And it was horrible for the family. They had just gotten a dog that they had loved so much, and to have it only live for such a short time. And of course, the neighbor felt absolutely horrible, had no idea that antifreeze was so attractive to dogs. The other thing is, in the spring when people put down the ant traps, one of the substances inside those ant traps is peanut butter, because it really attracts the ants. But it's mixed with the toxins that are neurotoxins that kill ants. And so dogs are very attracted to those ant traps. Again, make sure that they're not in a place where the dogs can get to them. And if you put them out in a room that you have ants coming into, close all the doors and put poison signs on the door so that people know not to let their dogs in until you've taken those traps up off the floor.
Well, as they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yeah,
and that
absolutely.
is very true.
Absolutely. Yes. And those, what you were saying about the tropical plants, I mean, these are the plants that we have in our homes. And why are they in our homes? Because they can't survive our winters, so they're not outside. But our pets are in our homes too. And puppies especially, my goodness, they can get into anything. And they're very, very diligent. They get at what they want, come hell or high water.
Yes, they are resilient, but they're also quite sensitive. And another thought came to me. If you use things like air fresheners or those scent, those plug-in things that scent up the home, or even essential oils, just be mindful that their sense of smell is 10 times more than ours. We, communicate first with, we see something first, and then we communicate with our words. Their first sense of communication is smell. It's very, very powerful. They always smell first and then do everything second. So just also be mindful of that.
Good points. Well, we're going to take our first break. And when we come back, we'll continue our conversation in a more positive way. I'd like to get into the nitty-gritty of the raw food diet. The pros, the cons, the how you make it, where you can buy it, and what kind of ingredients are in a raw food mix. We're talking with Lucy Jabrayan, and she's from Thrive4life Holistic Pet Foods in Stouffville. We'll be right back. You're listening to Fresh Waves. I'm your host, Bren Masson. Remember, if you'd like to hear this show again, you can check out our YouTube channel at Fresh Waves Radio. Now let's get back to the show. We're back on Fresh Waves. I'm your host, Bren Masson. This morning, we're talking with Lucy Jabrayan. She's from Thrive4life Holistic Pet Foods. We are talking about raw food diets, the pros and cons. And right now, I'd like to talk about what is in a raw food diet. I have seen people who take a pound of ground beef out of the refrigerator, put it in their dog's bowl, crack a raw egg over top of it and say, here, Fido, here's your wonderful raw food diet. Is that really a raw food diet? First of all, I've never seen ground beef anywhere in the wild, but that's just me.
Well, there is a reason why a commercial raw food company will grind the food, but based on what you're saying, yes, I wish it was as simple as me throwing a chicken thigh at my dogs and calling it a day. And I also believe that sometimes people are averted to raw because they think it is about throwing a carcass at their dogs. Now, some people can do that, and that's fine, but there really is more of a science to that in terms of feeding properly a raw food diet. So personally, everything that we sell is fully balanced out. So you don't have to really think about, ooh, do I add this? Do I add that? It's done for you. Another thing is that when you buy a properly made raw pet food, after they make the food, they freeze it right away. And what that does is it kills about 99% of the bacteria in the food. So this is why I wouldn't really ever advocate going to the grocery store and feeding grocery store meat raw, because it's been sitting in the fridge. And, there is a reason why the government tells us to cook our meat so that we kill bacteria. So when it comes to our dogs, we want to make sure that it is clean, proper, clean meat that we are feeding to them. Now, when veterinarians pose a concern about when someone is feeding raw, I'm actually with them on this one because let's face it, it's an unregulated industry. Anything goes. Right now, the raw food industry has blown up, which means everyone and their mother is out making raw pet food. So, you're going to have the grades, just like in the kibble world, you have your grades, you have the stuff that you buy, at a gas station, and then you have the stuff that you buy maybe at a more of a boutique place. Same thing with the raw food industry. You have your McDonald's, quote unquote, sorry, McDonald's, but the fast food quality, so to speak, brands, and then you have the brands that really don't cut the corners. They really don't take any shortcuts. And so when you go to your vet's office and they are concerned that you are feeding raw, yes, because you can, in a sense, do it incorrectly.
So how would the average person know what's the good one and what's not? This is where I have a problem.
Yes. So before I opened my business, I was feeding raw. Which meant that I did it in many ways, and I now consider that part of my homework and my research. I personally don't feel comfortable going to a place where they sell raw in bulk. What do I mean by that? It's not labeled, there's no batch number. You're basically taking someone's word for it. And the last time, this was years ago, the last time I went to a place where they sold raw food in bulk, sorry to gross you out, folks, but I found worms. I found maggots in my pet food. And that was when I was like, I'm done. I am so done. Another place I wouldn't really advocate is maybe going to a butcher. Now, go to your butchers for you. Go support your local butcher. Maybe they have some nice bones and you would like to give your dog a nice bone. Absolutely. But, I don't know who died and made butchers nutritionists. Like I said before, there really is a science behind formulating a really good quality and formulated raw pet food. Another way you would know which one's good, which one's not, is go to that local independent pet food store and just ask a lot of questions. And if they give you something like, if they say something like, oh, well, this is our best seller. Well, that doesn't really mean that much to me. Why is this good? Okay, what's the difference between brand A, brand B, and brand C? And so as you hear their thoughts and you see, wow, you know what? They know their stuff. Like I personally know every single brand owner of every formulated food. If anything were to go wrong, I can get them on the phone in 2.5 seconds and have a conversation with them. So it's that those types of relationships are also important. Um, and this is an industry where things change a lot. Companies get bought out. Again, make sure that the person you're speaking to, really knows the ins and outs, how the food is formulated, where the meat is coming from. Is it really human grade or is it quote unquote human grade? And then just do your research online as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
even
that
contact.
opens, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that really does open up a whole new kettle of fish. Going online is as bad as going into the store and looking at those shelves of pet foods. There's just so much online. And how does someone know what is good information and what is not?
So when you go to an independent store and you speak with someone who's really into this, it's their life's work, you feel like, you know what, they know what they're talking about. The reason why I say independent is because, like, for instance, I'm an independent store. There is no one from head office breathing down my neck. You need to bring in this brand. No, 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 we're not supporting this brand anymore. Da, 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 da. I bring in simply what I feel is the best of the best in the industry. Because a lot of pet owners out there have pets with issues. I personally knew that going into my business. So in my mind, it's like, well, I can't help fix a problem that was caused by an inappropriate diet with another inappropriate diet. If I'm going to help fix an issue, it really has to be the best. And I also personally feed what I sell. And just to keep it 100% with you guys, if I sold kibble, the margins on kibble is astronomical compared to the margins on raw. I've been told by a really high-end brand that, all of my dogs and all of my cats would be getting free food from them. Like I could have really have gone the other way, and I've chosen not to. So when you go to an independent store and you speak to them and you really feel like, you know what, they actually believe in what they sell, they know the company very well. I can even go to the company and ask the questions myself. And again, it has to, at the end of the day, resonate with you. But also on the raw food topic, ask yourself, is raw food really the best for my dog right now? Because sometimes I don't recommend raw food at a certain point in the dog or cat's life. And that's a whole nother topic. I love raw. I believe a healthy dog and cat will thrive on raw, but an unhealthy dog or cat might not be able to tolerate raw at that point in time. And I help the dog or cat owners also figure that out.
Mm-hmm. So I've always been curious, how do you buy raw food? Does it come to you frozen? Do you run out every 3 days and purchase raw food? How do we buy raw food if that's the route we want to go?
Yes, a wonderful question. So it's less intimidating as you might think. And no, it's not throwing a carcass at your dog, which some people still think it is. It comes in a very neat and tidy package. Some come in the form of patties. They look exactly like hamburger patties. Some, I call them bricks, and they're individually wrapped in a thermal pouch. So no leaking, no nothing. You can store it very clean in the freezer and in the fridge. And it is triple ground. And the reason why it's triple ground is you want to make sure to balance it, there is ground bone in there for the calcium. So no sharp, chunky pieces of bone. It's all wonderfully ground up, which also means that the digestibility is going to be much, much higher. And in terms of quality, you can buy as little as 2 pounds at a time. You can buy as much as 24 pounds at a time. It really is up to the pet owner and how often they want to make a trip. There are some people who come in weekly, bi-weekly, once a month, every 6 weeks. Some of my customers have bought a little chest freezer specifically for their pets. You could do that too, but as little as 2 pounds or as much as 24 pounds at a time.
So just
or more.
Okay, and then just so that the listeners have some idea of quantity, I mean, you read the back of a kibble bag and it says for a dog of 30 to 55 pounds, give 2 cups to 2.5 cups a day. And we were just talking about how people tend to overfeed our dogs. So in raw, what
Yes.
quantity are we talking?
So for an adult dog and cat, it's roughly 2% of their body weight. Now, that is a guideline. And what do I mean by that? A Labrador's metabolism is going to be different than a Malinois' metabolism. The Labrador's metabolism is like a Honda Civic, and the Malinois' metabolism might be like a Ferrari. So you need to feed them like a Ferrari. So 2% is the general guideline, but always gauge on the weight. So if you own a very high active dog like a Malinois or say, a border collie, and you're feeding 2 pounds a day and your dog is getting skinnier and skinnier, well, up it to 2.5 pounds, maybe even 3 pounds. A Labrador at 2 pounds might be perfect, or you know what? You might be noticing they're getting a little chunky monkey. 1.5 pounds, 1.5% of their overall weight. So as an example, a 50-pound dog, 2% of that is a pound a day. So if you own a 50-pound dog, it's roughly a pound a day. Also factor in treats. If you're overdoing it on the treats, you might have to cut back on the food. Now, puppies and kittens, 6 to 8% of their weight. But again, the best way for you to gauge how appropriately you're feeding them is always by the weight. You want them to be a lean, mean fighting machine. And even 1 pound of them being overweight will put enough stress on their organs, on their joints, and everything. So how I personally feed all my dogs and cats is I slightly underfeed them, but I over supplement them. So they're all this lean, mean fighting machine. They're not skinny, but they have a really nice shape to them. And that's how I personally like to feed my guys.
Okay, so on that, if your dog, if you put down the food, are they going to just eat and eat and eat and eat, or do dogs stop eating once they are full?
No, so say you own a 50-pound dog, they get fed 1 pound a day. Now you might want to split that up, half a pound AM, half a pound PM, or if you really want to feed them, the best way for their metabolism is to actually feed them once a day. Like I feed my dogs once a day, generally late in the morning. So, and that way they are kind of intermittent fasting anyways. So once they finish up their 1 pound of food, then that's it. And they're getting all the nutrition and the caloric requirements they need from that meal.
Well, that's something to consider when you talk about overfeeding, and I have heard that many, many times that, pet food companies are in the business of selling you food. And from a human point of view, the reason why junk food is so successful in the world and so many people love it is because it actually has an addictive quality. And people do overeat because it tastes so good, and our bodies crave the crunch. It craves the fat. Fat tastes good. So in the dog world, I imagine it's probably not that different.
Yes, and also what can happen is when you switch them from a food that's, like kibble that has a bunch of fillers and preservatives to raw, they're going to love the raw, and of course they're going to want more. And this is why it's also important to work with nutritionists on this. You also have to discern, well, are they still hungry, or is it that they just love the food? Because back in the day when I used to work at another place, I sold this particular brand of raw where every time I sold it to someone, because I thought at the time it was good, they would come back and they'd be like, you know what, Lucy? My dog's going through the garbage, and my dog never did that. My dog always seems hungry. Now, if I heard that once or twice, I would think, okay, whatever. But every time I sold that brand of food, I would get, Lucy, my dog is constantly hungry and it's going through the garbage. He never or she never did that before. Well, once I did my own research and homework and I found out that that brand basically very, very void of nutrition. So it's raw, but very, very void of nutrition. So that's why, if your dog's digging around and wanting more, I would say that's a bit of a red flag and that shouldn't really happen.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, so when people say, well, you said earlier, bone broth is really great for them. How do we make a bone broth for dogs? Do we use the herbs and onions and garlic that I use in my own bone broth?
No, so you can go to a pet food store and get bone broth specifically made for pets. If you want to make it yourself, my best recommendation is keep it simple. Don't add all the vegetables. I mean, if you want to add a vegetable, carrots, totally fine, broccoli, totally fine. But other than that, just keep it simple and also be mindful of the sodium content. So I also wouldn't recommend going to like buying a bone broth made for people and giving that because, again, of the sodium content.
Yeah, it's too high. And what about the fact that onions are toxic to dogs? They don't do well with onions.
That's correct. Raw onions, fed a lot, can absolutely be toxic.
I always found that interesting. We're one of the only species that can tolerate onions. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Every other animal stays away from them except for human beings. Okay, so we can make our own bone broth and add it to the kibble. Is there a graduating way of, like, I know I've been told in the past, even if you're switching from one dog food to another, do it gradually over a couple of weeks, maybe even a month, add a little bit more of the one that you're switching to so that it's a gradual process and you don't make your dog sick. Is it the same with raw? Do you have to do a gradual influx of raw food into their kibble before you switch, or can you switch tomorrow afternoon?
It depends. It depends on the case. It depends on them as an individual. So generally speaking, puppies, you could do cold turkey. Of course, the slower the transition, the more chances of a success. But I find with puppies, you could do cold turkey. If you want to do it as a slower gradual change, I would never recommend mixing raw in with kibble. They're both digested very differently at very different rates. What I would suggest is maybe kibble like in the morning and then a little bit of raw at night, and then eventually no more kibble and just raw. I always tell people, pick a team because both of them together, I've seen issues come about that. One of my customers, she switched her dog to raw, and her dog actually was a puppy. And then she said, her puppy has been having some, bloat, gastrointestinal issues. And then I found out she was still using kibble as training treats. So when that was switched and that stopped, her GI issues completely disappeared.
Wow, that's good food for thought. I mean,
I would say the slower you go, the more of a success of a transition. And you will know right away when your dog or cat is not ready for raw. Their body can't handle it and they would literally reject it. And that would either happen vomiting or throwing up. So you take a step back, get them good again, and then you can attempt again or work with someone who can better help you transition the safe and effective way. Because I just find they're all like a fingerprint. They're all individuals. And we want to do the best for them that we can. Cancer rates are 1 and 2, and anything we can do to help them expand their lifespan I think the Guinness World Record of the oldest living dog was, I believe, past 28 years old. Cattle dog in Australia who roamed the 10 acres, had access to, raw food. This is the part where most North Americans have a meltdown, but this dog was only fed 4 days a week. And this dog lived to be past 28. And I believe it's because it had a bunch of exercise. The diet was mimicking its natural ancestral diet. And it, of course, was also a well-loved dog. And something to be said too about whatever your dog's breed is, if they're fitting in with their purpose, I think that's going to also help their soul. It's going to give them more of a will, if you will. Like if you, for instance, very basic example, take a dog who loves to run and put it in a condo 8 hours of the day. You still walk it, 1 hour of a day, but is that really enough for that dog? Is that dog fulfilling its purpose? No. So as you see, there's so many aspects to health, but at least on the diet part, if we do our part, and just help them out, help their genes, we're going to find to be much, we're going to see that we have a better dog for it. Like when I took my dog the other day to the vet for a checkup, it's almost like an ego boost for me because he checked his teeth. Oh, beautiful teeth. He checked in his ears. Oh, beautiful ear. And he patted his coat and he said, well, whatever you're feeding him looks like it's agreeing with him because he has a beautiful coat. That's what we want when we go to the vet. It's like, check, check, check. We get a gold star, and that just made me feel so good. And it was a bit of an ego boost. And another way to think about it is they don't really have a say in what they eat, what treats they get, whether, they want certain things or not. So also listening to them and just at the end of the day, doing what you feel resonates with you. So maybe you do feed your dog and cat kibble and you're not ready for raw, and that's okay. You can do some of the suggestions, take some of the suggestions I suggested today and at least hydrate their food. Add a little bit of vegetables, do the bone broth. I mean, even that makes such a world of a difference. Maybe give them a nice raw bone once in a while. That will help with mental stimulation, dental health, more minerals, more nutrition. So all of these
it's funny because I just listening to you now, I'm thinking, okay, I know some dogs that love a raw carrot. My other dog used to be just crazy for raw carrots. And currently my dogs won't touch them. The carrots fall on the floor, they give them a sniff and walk away. And, I guess it all depends on their own tastes too. So we would have to, you did recommend cooking the vegetables just so that they're a little more broken down, which is good advice. And, then I've also dropped cooked vegetables on the ground where the dogs kind of look at it and say, really? No thanks. And maybe that's because kibble or some kibble is like junk food. And part of junk food is that with the higher carbohydrates or the sugar content, it tastes yummy. And so the others pale in comparison.
Yes. Also remember that they are true carnivores at heart. So I'm sure if you were chopping up a cooked chicken breast or even a raw chicken breast and that fell on the floor, your dogs would just gobble it up. So they always would prefer meat if they had their choice.
Yeah.
And you know what? Like I also know someone who had a dog who loved lettuce, who loved cucumber. So some dogs do have affinity for the vegetables and the fruits.
Well, another thing I saw online, which I think is actually quite cruel, is there was a YouTuber who was discussing how they have a totally vegan dog. And look at how my dog is thriving on its vegan diet. And I wanted to write in the comments, why are you killing your dog? Dogs aren't meant to be vegans.
Yeah, so the vegan kibble out there, it's first of all, it's made with ingredients that they were never really properly able to digest. Most I've seen on the market are predominantly made with peas. And dogs actually don't have the enzyme to break down and digest peas. So what could happen is, I call it a honeymoon stage. So say a dog or cat, let's just keep it simple, a dog is not doing well, and you remove that offending ingredient and put them on a different diet, and it could be, say, a vegan kibble. They can actually improve for a little bit, because you stopped offering that offending ingredient to them. So their body's going, oh, thank you, and they can recover a little bit. So that honeymoon stage is where they look better, and you're like, aha, I found the best food. But moving forward, is that diet serving them? And how you would really know that is, even if they look fine on the outside, again, you go to the vet for a checkup, you test their levels, and say the blood work came back and your vet's like, yeah, your dog's calcium's in the toilet. Something needs to give, because long term, this can happen. Musculoskeletal issues can happen, heart issues can happen down the line. I don't know if that answered your question, Brenda.
I think so. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of the fads and trends that you see online, it's again what we were talking about before. You have to know your sources. Look and see who's sponsoring this. Look and see if the person who's talking about their dog's vegan diet has any training at all in nutrition, if they've done their homework. And I like your advice about looking at the species, because I've learned a lot about dogs by going up to the Halliburton Wolf Reserve, and I'm going to say their name again, because if you've never been there, it's a fabulous thing to do. And it's really interesting when they talk about the species of dog and what it is and how it exists and what it eats and how it thrives, and the big feast that happens when they accept roadkill sometimes, a deer carcass or something, and they throw it in, and who eats first and who eats second, and all of this hierarchy and the wonderful lives of wolves in the wild. It's fascinating. It's really fascinating. And I think it does help to give us a better understanding of maybe what we should be feeding our dogs and how we should be treating them.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So if someone wants to learn more about this and they're not really ready yet to make the jump to raw,
right?
Are you available for consultation?
Absolutely. Any questions anyone can have, they can always write to me or call me. You can pop in. We're open Monday to Friday. You don't need an appointment. If you wanted to book in a consult, that is by appointment. And, any simple questions, or if you wanted to come in, our doors are open. Another really good resource is, it's a documentary. It's been out now for a bit, but it's called Pet Food, PETFOOLED. That's such an eye-opener for what really goes down in the pet food industry. Another really amazing resource is a holistic vet out in the States. Well, actually, there's a few of them, but one really well-known is Dr. Karen Becker, and she also a wonderful resource, tons of information. She actually just released a book with Rodney Habib called The Forever Dog, and when they released that book, I was like, amazing, because I am someone who's genuinely interested in, okay, gene expression. How can we get our dogs and our cats thriving? What makes them live longer? Because that's what they did. They traveled across the globe and they found really, really old dogs and even old cats, and they interviewed the owners like, what are you doing? Like that dog that lived to be past 28 years old. That genuinely fascinates me. And if that also fascinates you, check that book out. It's called The Forever Dog. And yes, other than that, if anyone wants to pop in or have any questions, they can also reach out to us. Our website is thrive4lifepetfood.com. That's thrive, the number 4, lifepetfood.com. And I also implore you to click the blogs tab, because I also give you guys tons of information there regarding that. If you are curious, if you are feeding kibble, and you want to know the carbohydrate content, check out the blog post I made, How to Calculate Sugar Content in Your Pet's Food, where I give you the equation, very simple equation where you can calculate yourself.
Okay, what is it?
Carbs.
I'm keen to know.
It's all on the website. It's all there for you guys. Even the article, how kibble is manufactured, to things you can do and add to boost your pet's immune system. So many things.
Okay.
So I implode you guys to check that out. And,
okay.
Yes.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really, really glad that we could have this conversation, and I hope that we'll do it again sometime. We'll do a part 2, more in depth. And today we covered basically the broad scope of pet food, and I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Brenda.
Well, that's it for Fresh Waves today. I'm your host, Bren Masson. We've been speaking with Lucy Jabrayan from Thrive4life Holistic Pet Food. If you'd like to hear this podcast again, you can go to our YouTube channel, Bren at freshwaves.ca, and you can tune in every Sunday morning here at Whistle FM for more Fresh Waves. Have a great day, everyone, and thanks again for joining us on Fresh Waves. We'll talk to you next week.